And then there are big B bugs. That's where little b bugs show up in that diagram. Then there are big B bugs. Those are big B bugs. Big B bugs are the ones where the code does exactly what the developer intended. It's just not what the customer wanted. Little B bugs, they may not show up for quite a while once you put them in production. Big B bugs, you put it into production, the customer comes back an hour later and says, "What the hell is this?" And by the way, if y'all have questions, feel free to jump in with questions at any time.
I just saw LL take a picture of you with the B bug in the background.
Mm-hmm.
That should be your LinkedIn profile.
That's what I'm gonna post.
Yeah, you know. Leslie, the
Those are big B bugs right there that I heard. Specification by example is a product development methodology that is designed and documented to eliminate bugs. So it's designed to eliminate both types. As I said, specification by example is a better name for BDD. TDD, test-driven development, you may hear that in the same context. And before you tell me that I'm smoking really good stuff, this eliminate bugs thing, really, let's talk about what this has been documented to do. Go ahead.
How is this, are the examples in specification by example any different from like integration tests? And if so, how?
They should be the same things you're testing in integration tests.
Okay.
So we'll get to that though. So BNP Paribas, a very large French multinational bank, they had very good metrics. They were agile, been agile for years. Their developers were spending 34% of their time fixing bugs, and I think that is a very typical number for any development team. Yeah.
That's
No.
Simon Powers came in and introduced two changes: BDD, specification by example, and TDD. And 9 months later, the developers were spending 4% of their time fixing bugs.
nice.
SPE is not magic. It is definitely not take a 4-day class and you're an expert. It takes time and practice and discipline, but wow, it really can work. I'm sorry?
I have a quick question. So
Certainly.
BBD is the industry term that's known.
Yes.
SPE is not known, that's your term that you're.
It's not my term, no. Gojko Adzik wrote the book Specification by Example.
Okay.
The Aslak Helisoy wrote the first tool, first program that was widely used in the BDD world, and he said Gojko found a better term for what it is we do.
They're interchangeable.
They're interchangeable, completely interchangeable, yes. At Raytheon Technologies, right in Buckhead, I introduced SPE in a data science group. Over a 1-year period, after training and coaching, they delivered into production 2 defects. And everyone agreed those 2 bugs were not in the requirements. But the developers said, yes, but we should have known that the data scientists would want that, so we're going to count it as a bug. I can't knock that. 2 bugs in a year.
How much stuff did you ship?
A lot. They went from from doing a release every 3 months or 4 months to doing a release monthly.
That's good.
So they shortened their release cycle, more releases per year, and delivered 2 bugs.
This is military grade stuff, it's right here.
Traditionally, a development project requires a lot of documents. You've got the requirements documents, you've got the architectural documents, you've got the design documents, detailed design documents, you have the test cases created by the QA team, and then you have a requirements traceability matrix. So you know which test cases map back to which requirements, and when you've executed a test case, you know which requirements pass or fail. And these documents are all decoupled. If the requirements change, you have to manually propagate those changes to all the other documents. There are tools that will tell you this requirement is attached to this test case. The requirement change, you need to examine the test case. They're tools, but it's still a manual process. And it often doesn't happen. The design documents contain additional boundary conditions that the developers have to think about, and they're probably never going to be reviewed by the product owner. So that's an opportunity for the developers to write really good, high-quality, maintainable code that you can now throw away because it does the wrong thing. And the test cases will almost certainly never be reviewed by the product owner. So this is an opportunity for the QA team to create yet another perspective on what it is that the customer wants. And the developers aren't going to review the test cases.
I'm
either.
sorry, were you spying on me?
Pablo asked if I was spying on his team.
I feel attacked.
SPE has just two documents. We've got the requirements documents, and we've got the architectural documents. We don't need detailed design documents that list out all of the boundary conditions, because SPE says you specify those as examples in the requirements.
So, I got a question.
Go ahead, Pablo.
In big organizations, how the thing looks basically ends up being a parallel requirement, right? Here's how it works, here's how it needs to look. And how it looks, it's also how it works. And there might be some background services affected. Where does that come in play? Where does the design, how it looks, where is it defined? Is it in required documents?
So are you asking about the visual aspects of it as a UI?
UI, UX, yeah.
Yes, UI, UX. So those some of that can be specified in the requirements documents in an SPE methodology. And some of it you would specify with a layout, a wireframe.
Right, but that's not a document itself, that's a technical resource.
Right, yes. So that might be a different document, but talking generally about any program, any application that you're developing has these documents.
Okay.
Some also have wireframes
Okay.
or UI UX documents.
Yeah.
So there are no test cases. The QA team spends 0 time writing test cases. And if there are no test cases, there's no requirements traceability matrix. Well, how can you possibly do that? The requirements are identically the test cases. We actually create an interpreter that will run our requirements. We treat them as a formal grammar, and we run them against our implementation. And they either pass or they fail. So if you can run your requirements, why would you need test cases? And if you can run your requirements and your report is a list of your requirements and they are all either green or red, why do you need a requirements traceability matrix? It's not real tough to hand a list of requirements to the product owner. They're all either green or red. The product owner can pretty quickly figure out what parts are not working and what the impact is going to be on the customers. So specification by example is not a development or QA tool. It is a different development methodology, and it is a very radical paradigm shift. It's like switching from waterfall to agile. It is a different world, and you have to think about it differently. That's why it is not a 4-day course and you're an expert. Pablo again.
Now that you mentioned waterfall, agile, and what I like to call a mixture of the two, which is fragile, right? What we do. When you're introducing specification by example, when you're talking about it, simply just trying to enlighten people around it. How do you go to product owners, scrum masters, or in between? How do you? This kind of feels a little bit like it might threaten them,
Yes.
right? Because they're losing control of my precious documents. Because a lot of these decisions are just people writing documentation for my reads. How do you sell
The way that I do that is I explain to them what the advantages are for them. And sometimes I was sitting in a meeting with a development manager and director and a product owner. And the development manager said, we don't need this specification by example stuff. We've got this really good unit test suite. We've also got some functional tests in it. We just need to extend that, enhance it. And the product, I didn't say a word, the product owner jumped in and said, I'm sure it's a great unit test suite. I'm sure you can enhance it. But I don't know what you're testing, and I don't know what you're going to deliver. If we write our requirements using specification by example, and we automate them, I know exactly what you're testing, and I know exactly what you're going to deliver. So that's the advantage for the product owner or product manager.
Does the PO ultimately own the process?
The three groups own it together.
And are you teaching those 3 groups the same content?
Yes, you have to teach all 3 groups. To do this well, you teach all 3 groups together. Product owner, business analyst, whatever they are in your company, developers, and QA.
Okay, so thinking back on like the 3 groups of people who think they know what the customer wants. A fourth one that I don't think you've covered as of yet is like the product owner who thinks they know what the customer wants. And it seems like SPE will sort of fill that circle in a sense. But if there's any overlap, if there's something that doesn't overlap between that circle and what the customer wants,
Yes.
that's still not going to
Right,
cover.
no, this does not, if the product owner is not communicating with the customer clearly, then this does not fix that problem. You could show these requirements to the customer, they would understand them,
But they won't care because it's not the thing they want.
Right, exactly. So absolutely, that's absolutely
So
true.
it becomes, I'm sorry, I know you gotta move this slide. These are great questions that I'm doing.
So how does this actually work? Yes?
Oh, well, sorry, I was maybe I could wait for this. Maybe this could wait later. Could this apply to a smaller team as well as a larger team?
Oh, absolutely.
Okay.
It becomes de facto documentation. So if I have the requirements, I know how the organization works, because the software will mimic how the organization works.
Conway's Law. Right? Conway's Law?
Sorry?
Conway's Law? Conrad's Law.
I don't know.
Mike?
So, what this kind of reminds me of is a company I worked for. They had multiple branches. Obviously, everybody takes care of it. So I was in support. Support was very. Customers were like, "Oh my God, everything's not what I wanted. Like this release sucks," and I'm like in support trying to fix it. So we communicate product management, we communicate system engineering, trying to fix the thing, right? So eventually, what we designed was a team that was comprised of like software developers, implementation engineers, support, sales engineers, and what we would do is basically kind of like what you're saying. we'd fly to the site and we'd sit down with the people and say, hey, show me your day-to-day, and then I'm gonna show you how you can do your day-to-day. I'm gonna figure out how you can do your day-to-day, like architect that out to get your solution to the end. Because the problem we were seeing is that, like you said, sales sell something, sales engineering comes behind it going like, oh shit, I gotta make this work, okay? And then the implementation sets it up, support gets it, and we're like, this isn't what they wanted.
Yes.
And when we started doing this other process, it changed the approach, and the customers at that point started like when the turnovers happened, it was very more like a lot more successful. Like they were happy and.
Specification by example emphasizes that this is a collaborative effort. Product owner, product manager, developers, and QAs all together. It's not one team of one of those. It's all three together. So here's what it looks like. Here's a user story. I'm in the accounting department. I want to apply a penalty to late payments. And if we wrote that using specification by example, we might say, given an active customer account, because you can't have a late bill unless you've got an active customer account, and a bill that is 15 days, 31 days, or 91 days, or whatever it is in your company, past due. That is a concrete example, a discrete example. It doesn't say more than 14, it says 15. 15 days past due. When the bill is paid, then a 5% penalty will be charged. It's really tough for the developer to misunderstand that requirement. And then the QA folks on the team, when we're writing these requirements, they're going to immediately say, okay, so 14 days. There's no penalty at 14 days? And the product owner goes, yep, no penalty at 14 days. And they say, okay, so we need to say, and a bill that is 14 days past due, then a 0% penalty will be charged. Are there any longer periods, more overdue bills, at which you charge a higher penalty? They're going to ask these questions. The developer reads the requirement like this: when the bill is paid. That's an event that comes to my software, and I have to process it. The first thing I have to do is check the preconditions. Given these preconditions, an active customer account, and a bill that is 15 days past due. Then I have to create the expected result. What is the expected result? Then a 5% penalty will be charged. And the QA team, as I said, they create an interpreter to run this requirement given an active customer account. Let's create an active customer account in the system. And a bill that is 15 days past due. Let's create a bill that is 15 days past due. When the bill is paid, let's feed it to the developers, the application, and say we're paying it. Then a 5% penalty will be charged. The QA team, the interpreter that they created, has to verify that the appropriate penalty got charged. So you're all working off the same requirement, and it's got concrete examples. It's really, really tough to go wrong at this point. Yes?
So is it possible in the sense of like race conditions? Like it's hard to.
This does not work for non-functional tests. This is functional.
Yep.
Yes, you can still create race conditions. So we write an interpreter for our requirements, and our requirements are now treated as a formal grammar. And in the Python world, there are three obvious ways to do this: behave, pyTestBDD, and pyTestBDD-NG. And two of those are obsolete. pyTestBDD-NG came out actually last year, and behave and pyTestBDD both use proprietary parsers. This given when then language is called Gherkin, and it's a formal specification. It's defined, and pyATL and behave both use proprietary parsers that do not implement all of Gherkin, have bugs. pyATL uses the official Python implementation of the Cucumber Gherkin parser. pyATL allows you to use Cucumber expressions, which are handy to have. It's got other nice things in it as well. There's no reason to use the other two. Yes?
Does NG stand for not gherkin?
No, it stands for next generation.
One question.
Yes?
Why did they have to create a custom language? Why not just use YAML for writing these specifications?
Because they want the product owner to be able to read these and fully understand them. And so if the QA team writes a test case and they take it back to the product owner and they ask, is this correct? Their test case says, click this button, type this in this field, click that button, click this other button, then check this column in this table in the database and see if you have that value. And they go to the product owner and ask, is this correct? The product owner is going to look at it, and at least, in the southern United States, it's going to look at it and go, damn if I know. Here, they can absolutely, they're writing the requirements in a formal grammar. So how does this help? Well, the product owner, we've already said, has a much higher probability of getting delivered what it is they ask for, what they want. The developers have all of the boundary conditions listed with concrete examples, and the boundary conditions are exactly what they have to code for. Every boundary condition is a conditional in their code. And QA team, guess what? Those boundary conditions are exactly what they have to test. So they're all listed in the requirements. Makes life easy. So, additional learning. Before you Google BDD tutorial, please read my blog post titled Never Google BDD Tutorial.
How do I find that blog post?
If you Google, never Google BDD tutorial, you'll find it. Yes.
That's some deception.
There is so much bad advice out there. So much bad advice.
At the end, could you show the
I'll show
link?
it. Yes. When 20 years ago, Agile was being used by 15, maybe 20% of the companies out there, companies experimenting with it. And some companies were reporting really phenomenal results, and most companies were doing it really, really badly. Like the company I knew where they were Agile, they had a Scrum every day, and they had sprints, they had 3-month sprints. So that's the URL, but just the BDDcoach.com. Go to BDDcoach.com, look at the tutorial, it'll be a blog post.
Twitter, the BDDcouch.com.
No. And there are other places that are very reliable. Cucumber.io, the folks who wrote the original tool, Cucumber. Goico wrote SpecFlow, which is the C# flavor implementation of Cucumber. So, questions? Sure.
So, if I'm understanding this correctly, the product owner will write like the Cucumber, like the things in the Cucumber grammar, given, when, whatever.
Yes.
And then the QA team will take those and then turn that into, put this in the database, click here, check this result.
No, they write an interpreter.
Like a literal interpreter.
A literal interpreter.
So
It's a formal grammar, and you run your requirements.
I
And
was
the advantage of
wanting
it-
to ask that, but I was like, this is
That seems like a lot of work to get started.
It is. To get started, it's painful. But then here's what happens. You get to the point where you have enough of your grammar implemented,
Yeah.
that you're sitting in a meeting and somebody says, what does our system do if you do that? And somebody else says, I don't know, let's write the requirement and see. And they open their laptop, they write the requirement,
So-
and they literally run it right there in the meeting because all the grammar has been implemented.
This
That makes
reminds me
sense.
of live.
It's a high, I thought you were being metaphorical by saying
No.
interpreter. This is a high level language. Very
Yeah,
like
so
high level.
You have
Yeah, so-
created a domain-specific language in which you can write requirements for your business.
I can see the XKCD comic which talks about this, which is the one where it's like, if it take like how much work something takes and how much it'll save you per run and how many times you run it. This is that, but that's like way out on the end.
It takes time
no.
to get it started.
Actually,
It is,
no, it's the other one where it's like how much time you think it will save you and how much time it actually takes to do the thing.
Well, but
Yes.
And then how much time
But
it
the
takes.
result is that you change your methodology. The QA team never runs a test case anymore. The QA team finds 0 defects.
Yeah, because you have a commonality in language. That's the big win. Like
Because now you're delivering automated tests in Sprint before the developers finish writing the code. So the developers, before they open a pull request, they run the tests. And if one of the requirements fails, they don't open the pull request.
And that's why they don't use YAML. It's not like it's I thought it was like again a not an Apple language. So I'm like, well, why can't I just write it and like take my notes in YAML? Because
Yes.
this sounds weird. Why do they have a
Yes.
formal system to take my notes?
Yes,
so, I have a tough one for you.
sure.
A tough one. So we adopted Gherkin. So the BAs, business analysts, adopted Gherkin to write out the acceptance criteria.
Yep.
Which is not a specification, right? And we struggle with that. What do you think about? What's your opinion in people learning Gherkin without having fully adopted SVE? Is there value to that to then transition into SVE?
There's tremendous value, but here's the question that I'll throw back at you. How many domain-specific languages have you created in your development career so far?
Still working on it.
How many people have created a domain-specific language? Forget the interpreter, just created a formal grammar for something.
I created a random programming language as a joke.
Okay, so 2 people in here have done it, okay? And how many of you think that the first time you do it, you'll do an awesome job?
Oh,
Yeah, it's pretty
I
cool.
got trained by Aslak, the guy who wrote Cucumber. And the first time I did this, I still did a lousy job. Yes.
So I work on an internal tools team, and I am QA and dev, and my stakeholders are engineers. My product owner is an engineer, and we have Gherkin in one of our code bases, but it just kind of seems like it's there interspersed with integration tests, and like there isn't really anybody there who can take with it and run. Is that just because we haven't implemented it fully?
Probably so. And the other thing is, remember, it's a formal grammar. How many ways do you think you want to write an if statement in your formal grammar? 6? Is that good?
maybe one.
Maybe 1. Okay, go look at your Gherkin and figure out how many different ways they have said the same thing. When you do that, the interpreter gets really gnarly, really fast.
We have that right now.
Yeah.
Because Gherkin is English based.
Yeah.
Right? So you can write a sentence.
If
If you have people who are polyglots, Spanish, whatever, then one must write that. Doesn't.
It's just if when then.
No, what about
Give
this?
me the point of
It's
that.
gonna
If
get
when then.
it's gonna get
Yes.
funny really
If
quick.
when then.
And if you do it really well, and you write a really good formal grammar where you have figured out what are the correct business terms to use for our business, and you always use that consistently. The way I say it is, if it means the same thing, you should always write it exactly the same way. And if you write it the same way, it should always mean exactly the same thing. Because when you do that, you give everybody confidence. The developer sees this and says, I've seen these words before, I know what they mean, I wrote the code, I can reuse the code. Or they say, I've seen these words before, there's one word that's different. I know that that one word difference is significant, and I have to understand that difference before I can finish the code.
Okay. Let's say I've got some small projects, let's say 1,000 lines of code, and I want to go from the typical unit plus integration test to SB. How much time should I expect it to take to get just, say, the first requirement?
So if it's that small a project, unless it is in a subject domain that you've already automated, you probably shouldn't automate it. You should write the requirements that way using Gherkin, because that way you can write them very, very clearly. But you probably shouldn't spend the time automating if that's all that you're able to do in that domain. It's when you know that you have a subject domain where you're going to write a lot of requirements, you're going to build a lot of code, you're going to do this for the next 3 years, then this pays off wonderfully, wonderfully well, because you can, the only way at Raytheon that we were able to deliver 2 bugs in a year was every single sprint. The automated tests were ready before the developers ever finished writing the code. And the only way you can do that is you reuse Gherkin. Your professor in Programming 101 taught you to make the upper layers of your program as abstract as possible, and to push the implementation details as far down as possible. I have an example. We've gone way over time with questions.
Well, we got time for one more. Go ahead.
Ike, I was going to do a demo to show you, but go ahead.
Real quick, high level, because I'm not on the level where you guys are talking. So what I'm understanding is the idea is try to limit if-then statements because they're variables, and write very clear sentence, normal human structure, so that we can reuse that rather than going into if-then statements where things can vary. Is that the idea?
Sort of, yes, sort of. Yeah, the idea definitely is create clear statements that you can reuse. You change one word in that sentence. For example, given an active customer account, given a expired customer account, given a suspended customer account, given a new customer account. Same Gherkin, one word, a parameter that changes affects how your interpreter runs. If you say given an active customer account, given a customer account that is expired, given a customer account that used to be active but is now suspended, you're getting yourself into deep mud.
Quick follow-up to a previous question. Who writes the interpreter? Is it QA?
Usually it's QA. It's whoever does your test automation.
Okay.
You can buy products, or you can. There's Cucumber open source.
Well, pyTestBDD NG.
Yeah.
I can show you a demo
All
after
this
the,
stuff is open source. Yeah.
after the talk.
It's not so much buying it as it is who's going to actually, you can't buy a thing that just works in
No,
your business,
you
so
can't.
you'll have to modify it.
Right.
And I was like, well, if you have, it seems like if your QA team is skilled enough to say go from nothing, figure out what the Gherkin means and then write the interpreter, they're about as skilled as your dev team, and you probably would just have them be devs instead of QA.
Some companies do it that way, where they have the devs, you have SDETs, software development engineer in test. Some companies absolutely do it that way. Yes, this is not for QA teams where you have manual QA people. The interpreter code should not be second-class code. It has to be first-class code. You have to write good quality code, maintainable, extendable. Question in the back.
What about the SDET rule?
What about the SDET? What?
The SDET rule and date. What's the difference between the SDET and date?
SDET and dev, simply focus. One is a developer, one is a software development engineer in test. So some companies do it that way. They're embedded in the development team.
I mean, they are doing development and as well as the test.
Sometimes, some companies, yes.
Title and responsibility.
And what about the QA?
Then in that case, they wouldn't have a separate QA team. Unless they have a few things that still need manual testing, like verifying visual stuff. The map shows up correctly.
That actually can be automated with Selenium. Or
It can be, it's harder to do.